A very good morning. Today we'll be discussing about the disaster management, the disaster management. What is a disaster? This means bad and aster means star. Any calamitous situation blamed on unfavorable position of star is called as a disaster. So disaster is basically a sudden calamitous event that causes disruption to the functioning of the community or society and causes human, property and economic losses. So it is also an occurrence of a widespread damage and destruction or a sudden catastrophe leading to loss of life or property. So before moving on to the disaster types and other things, let us see about what is hazard and risk. So the major difference between a hazard and a risk is a hazard is something that has a potential to cause harm, and risk is the probability that the hazard will cause harm. Say, for example, if we identify a shark in an ocean, so that is called as a hazard. So once when we are swimming with a shark in the ocean, that becomes a risk. So hazard is a source of potential loss or circumstance that have the potential to cause harm. So the primary source of risk which results in disaster. And the hazard becomes emergency when the imminent situation requires immediate attention. So some other example of hazard and risk are, let us say in terms of food. So if we are having food in a plate and if we are having fish, so sometimes the bones of fish may be very small and we may not be able to identify it. And for example, if we see that before eating, so that is called as a hazard. So that is a physical hazard. And the second one is the biological hazard. For instance, there are harmful bacteria, viruses, or parasites which are present in the plate, which are not able to view in naked eyes. And the third one is a chemical hazard, which is the presence of mercury in fish. So when these hazards becomes a risk, so the risk is determined by the exposure to a particular hazard, as we already seen. So how much is the exposure, how long is the exposure, and how often it is exposed. So that determines the risk. And this is one of the very good example about hazard and risk. So there is water and you are jumping into the water without going to swim. So that is a risk. So the water is a hazard and the person who is jumping without going to swim is a person at risk. And when we are lighting a match near a gas cylinder, that also becomes a risk. And when we are using mobile phone for texting or calling during driving, that also becomes a risk. So risk is basically a combination of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. So hazard can be defined as a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity, or condition that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts. So damage of property, loss of livelihoods, etc. What is vulnerability? It refers to the characteristics and circumstances of the community, system, or asset that make it susceptible to the damaging effect of a hazard. And exposure is the people, the structure, the agriculture area, business, asset, etc., which are exposed to a particular risk. So when these three combines, it becomes risk. So how can we reduce the risk? So hazard, we can improve our abilities to monitor and forecast the hazard. Exposure, increased awareness of the hazard faced by the communities and their exposure. And vulnerability, the greatest benefit can be achieved by not exposed to the hazard. So when there is a hazard and when there is a vulnerable group is exposed to it, that becomes a risk. So how this risk can be reduced? So when the vulnerable group, vulnerable people have a coping capacity, so the disaster risk can be easily reduced. So vulnerability is the basic effect of hazard, like physical vulnerability, social vulnerability, economic vulnerability, and attitudinal vulnerability. When we are looking into physical vulnerability, it depends upon the building and infrastructure, that is, or means of communication. So all these will be coming under physical vulnerability. And it is a social vulnerability, like societal interaction, community organization, all those things. And economic vulnerability, the entrepreneurship, savings, earnings, employable skills, or business. Attitudinal vulnerability is ready to accept the change, the collectivism approach. So all these things will be the basis of effect of so physical vulnerability is the influence of event on infrastructure, agriculture, etc. And the social vulnerability is the inability of the affected population. That is the level of literacy, governance, social justice, conventional values, etc. And the third one is the economic vulnerability, which is the impact on assets and business process. And the final environmental vulnerability is based on the natural resource degradation. So when we see the India's vulnerability to disaster, nearly 57% of land is vulnerable to earthquakes, and 68% is vulnerable to drought, 12% to flood, 8% to cyclone. So apart from these natural disasters, some cities are also vulnerable to man-made disasters and chemical industrial disasters also. So this is the Indian climatic risk map where it is divided into cyclone prone area, flood prone area, drought prone area, etc. So hazard is majorly the disasters like flood, tornadoes, landslides, earthquakes, cyclones, etc. And the vulnerability condition is the rapid urbanization will be causing more flood. The structures built with poor material techniques, increased poverty, rapid population growth, all these are the vulnerable conditions for a hazard to turn into a disaster. So when we see a conceptual framework for disaster risk, we can identify the hazard, the probability and severity of the hazard, the exposure, that is the structures, population, economy who are exposed to a hazard, the vulnerability, different types of vulnerability, physical, social, economic, and environmental, and capacity and measures, physical planning, social capacity, economic capacity, etc. So the disaster event is divided into two, pre-disaster event and post-disaster event. Pre-disaster event, we have the people, environment who are susceptible and who has the coping capacity. So we'll be having an information for about a disaster, so we can plan for the preventive measures. And post-disaster event, we'll be having information. We'll be reacting to the disaster and we'll be considering the reconstruction process. So this too will be based upon the humanitarian relief and sustainable development. So when and where a disaster it can occur any time and anywhere, and some disasters can be predicted and some are unpredicted. So warfare in special category because it is very planned and the damage is intended to this action. So disasters are divided into two categories, natural disasters and man-made disasters. So under natural disaster, we have meteorological disaster, geophysical disaster, hydrological disaster, climatological, and biological. Under the man-made, we have sociological, political, industrial, and human disasters. So under natural disaster, this is often caused by the natural forces and have to be accepted as unfortunate by the people. So this includes floods, droughts, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquake, etc. So every year, a natural disaster will be occurring in different parts of the world. And man-made disasters are the disasters which are resulted from the human activities. So these may be bomb explosion, dam failure, nuclear reactors, spread of diseases, war, etc. So if we see the natural disasters, some of the natural disasters like thunderstorm, sandstorm, snowstorm, tornado, etc. These are categorized into meteorological disaster. And the main type of this disaster to occur is the storm. And the subtype of disaster is a tropical storm, extratropical cyclone, local or convective storm. And subtype is the thunderstorm, lightning, snowstorm, sandstorm, dust storm, and so when we see the geophysical disaster, so it happens only on the land, like earthquake, tsunami, volcanic eruption, avalanches, etc. So this will be ground shaking, tsunami, rockfall, land subsidence, etc. The subtype will be the avalanches, debris avalanches, snow avalanche, mudslide, sudden subsidence, long-lasting subsidence. And when we see the hydrological disaster, we can name it as a river flood or and if it is a climatological disaster, it is because of extreme temperatures, drought, and wildfire. That is heat wave and cold wave, extreme winter condition, land fires, etc. So if it is a biological disaster, it may be epidemic, insect infestation. So if it is an epidemic, it will be viral, bacterial, fungal, parasitic infection, insect infestation like a grasshopper, locust, or worm. So what are the different interactions among the natural hazards? So the plate tectonics are mountain building, which will be related to earthquake, volcanic eruption, landslides, changes in climate condition, etc. And earthquakes are weather related. Tsunami is water related, and also it is based on the earthquake. Hurricanes are flood related, and some landslides will also be because of floods. So next is the man-made disaster, which is sociological, like arson, civil disorder, terrorism, etc. And the next one is a political disaster, like war, usage of chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, armed conflict, etc. So next is the industrial hazard, which is a chemical spill, explosion, transport accident, like railways, waterways, roadways, and engineering failure, like structure collapse. And the last one is a human made, which is human error of judgment, poisoning, acid poisoning, carbon monoxide poisoning, stampede, road accidents, etc. So these images shows the adverse effect of landslide, volcanic eruption, cyclone, and earthquake. So this is the Iraq war, terrorism, oil spillage, flood, which has happened globally. And some of the major disasters in India we can categorize like Bhopal gas tragedy 1984, Gujarat earthquake 2001, tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami 2004, and Mumbai attack 2000. And other such disasters in India are Uttarakhand forest fire, Visakhapatnam gas leak, Assam oil and gas leak, Gujarat chemical plant explosion, etc. So what is the severity of the impact? It depends upon many factors like predictability, type of disaster, density and population disruption, opportunity of warning, conditioning of the environment, and other things. So who are the elements at risk? So the first place will be given to the people, and then the livestock, then house vulnerability, crops, trees, other telecommunication things, roads, looms, working influence, personal property, infrastructure support. What will be the effect of disaster? The first effect is the death. Then comes the disability. Then increase in the communicable diseases. And psychological trauma. Those who are facing the trauma, who are not able to come out the trauma of the disaster, will be having serious psychological problems. Food shortage, socio-economic losses, environmental disruption. So all these are different effects of disaster. When we see about the dimensions of disaster, we can have psychological, which is an individual thing, social, which is individual and societal, economic, which is societal, regional, national, and global, and political, which is regional, national, and local. These are the different dimensions of disaster. Moving on to the disaster management, it aims to reduce the occurrence of disaster or reduce the impact of those that cannot be prevented. It also mitigates the effort. Disaster mitigation will be reducing the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disaster. So in order to mitigate the effect, we need to take action before the next disaster to reduce human and financial consequences. So disaster management is the type of management and organization having the resources and duties to deal with the entire human characteristics. So particularly during the emergencies like response, recovery, preparedness, which reduces the effect of disaster. What are the major objectives of disaster management is mitigation or reduction of risk of any disaster or its severity or consequences. Capacity building, including the research and knowledge management, prompt response to any threatening disaster situation, and assessing the severity or magnitude of the disaster. The scope of disaster management is to reduce the potential loss from any hazard, reduce the risk by timely measures, short-term and long-term policies, assure prompt and appropriate assistance to victims of disasters, and achieve rapid, effective, sustained, and durable recovery and rehabilitation. There are some principles in disaster management. This is comprehensive, that is, disaster managers consider and take into account all the hazards at all phases and all impacts relevant to the disaster. Progressive is like anticipating the future disaster and take preventive and preparatory measures. Risk driven use sound risk management principles like identification, risk analysis, vulnerability analysis, etc. Integrated is to ensure unity of effort among the government, NGOs, and all the local communities. Collaborative is create and sustain broad and sincere relationship among the individuals and also the organization. Coordinated is synchronize the activities to achieve the common purpose. Flexible, use creative and innovative approaches in solving the disaster challenges. And professional is a value of science and knowledge-based approach for continuous improvement. So there are different international organizations who support the disaster management in various parts of the world, and some are listed here. And some organizations in India who are working towards the national disaster management. And there are some NGOs who are volunteers. They form an important non-professional support team in disaster management. And what is the impact and response? The greatest need for emergency care is the first few hours of the impact. So the management of mass casualties are divided into different categories like search and rescue, first aid, field care, triage, tagging, identification of death. So what comes in search and rescue and first aid? So when you are having search and rescue team, they should be organized and they should work as one. So even with a good team, the search may be small fraction in major disasters. The immediate help is usually obtained from the uninsured. And what are the field care to be taken when there is a disaster? So the injured people to be brought to the nearest healthcare immediately by the means of transport like ambulance or other vehicles, and people coverage in health. The hospitals must be ready to take over the injured people, and bed availability, surgical services, all these should be kept ready. Food and shelter should be provided for the victims. And the center to respond to the inquiries from patients and relatives and friends should be there. So the priority will be given to victim identification and adequate mortuary space. And next thing is the triage. It consists of rapidly classifying the injured on the basis of the severity of their injuries and their likelihood of their survival, prompt medical intervention. So the principle of first come, first serve is not followed here. High priority is given to those who immediately or long-term prognosis can be changed dramatically with a simple intensive. And there is color code for triage. So internationally accepted color codings are 4 different types of colors like red, yellow, green, and black. Red is high priority treatment or transfer. Yellow is a medium priority. Green is ambulatory patients, and the black is dead or moribund patients. So triage should be carried out at the site of the disaster. Local health workers should be taught the principles of triage as what color belongs to which type of victim. And the people with minor injuries should be treated in their homes to avoid social dislocation. And all persons should be tagged with details like name, age, place of origin, price, initial diagnosis, and so this is the triage, which consists of different colors. Like red means immediate life threatening, uh, green means minor, they can able to walk on themselves, and yellow triage is like delayed, serious, not life threatening, and black is so these are different tags of triage. How to identify the dead people? So the dead people care is most important in disaster management because they impede the efficiency of rescue activities. So care of dead includes proper respect, removal of dead from the scene, shifting to mortuary, identifying who is dead, and reception of bereaved relatives. And next comes the disaster management cycle. So disaster management cycle is divided into four categories: preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. So preparedness is measures are enabled by government organizations, communities, and individuals to respond rapidly and effectively to any disaster situation. Response is measures which are taken immediately prior to and following a disaster impact. Recovery is the process by which the communities and the nation are assisted in returning to their proper level of functioning, and mitigation is the measures aimed at reducing the impact of the disaster. So the phases of disaster management will be like into two categories, like recovery phase after disaster and risk reduction phase before a disaster. So if it is a recovery phase after a disaster, there will be a response, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. If it is before a disaster, it is mitigation and preparedness. So pre-disaster and post-disaster phase, we have prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and pre-disaster. Response, rehabilitation, and reconstruction under post-disaster. So what's mitigation? It is like taking measures to reduce the effect of disaster before it is happening. So we should have proper disaster management approach before the disaster. So it includes three phases. One is the disaster risk reduction, like identifying, analyzing, assessing the hazard, vulnerability, and reducing the risk of the vulnerability. And the next one is capacity building. So in this step, the government, NGO, and several national and international organizations work to build up the capacity of people who are at risk and decrease their vulnerability. So this capacity is built up by creating awareness, social events, news, and information dissemination, etc. The third one is the adaptation process of coping with the environment. So it is like how people are adaptable when there is a climate change. So they should survive in the environment after a disaster is happening. So all these adaptation techniques should be taught to them prior in order to mitigate the effect of any disaster. Activities that reduces the effect of disaster will be coming under mitigation. So it is mainly focused on long-term measures for reducing or eliminating the risk. So mitigation measures can be structural or non-structural, and it also includes the building codes, zoning and land use management, regulations and safety codes, preventive health care, and public education. So moving on to preparedness. Preparedness is the emergency precaution and planning which is taken before the occurrence of the disaster. That thus it cannot affect so much. So here we have planning as a first phase. So in planning, the proper emergency plan should be made as how to respond when a disaster occurs. So the managed available transport, relief to fight against any disaster will be planned. And the next is the early warning. So it is the warning phase where warning is given in terms of early warning system or forecasting and analyzing weather and climatic conditions. And the next one is the coordination. It is the integration of national, international, community, and society based. All kind of organizations will work together for disaster management. Next is the framework for the disaster preparedness. So in this framework, we'll be having vulnerability assessment where we'll assess the vulnerability profile of various regions. And according to that vulnerability assessment, there will be proper planning and the institutional framework will be set up. So next will be the information system. So proper information will be provided for any kind of future disaster. And The response mechanism will also be monitored. So public education and training will be given in terms of rehearsals or presentations. The next one is the response. So in this phase, the government and several organizations respond to a disaster affected people with all kinds of facilities. Thus, they can survive. So the main thing here is the collaboration, working with several organizations with each other. So they cooperate each other to achieve the goal and help the vulnerable people. And the second one is the communication, networking, and transportation. Quick and effective communication system can reduce the effect of a disaster. So there are several tools which are used for communication, like GPS, GIS, and other remote sensing tools are also. And the response mainly includes saving the lives during a disaster, preventing the damage of the property, and to preserve the environment during emergencies or disaster. So it is the implementation of action plan, and it is the activity which is happening during a disaster. So public warning system, emergency operation, search and rescue all happens during the response phase. Next comes the recovery. So after any disaster event, people don't have enough capacity to recover their condition like before. So it is important to help them for recovering or reconstructing their lives and living. So rehabilitation is very important after the disaster period to return to the normalcy. This time, the vulnerable people need physical and mental support. So rehabilitation can be structural, non-structural. So this rehabilitation phase will be ensuring people both economically and mental support will be. So reconstruction is the individual can regain back to their normal life, like reconstruction of settlements, infrastructures, houses, and other properties. So this recovery phase is the activity which is following a disaster. So the aim is to restore the affected area to its previous state. What is a multi-hazard? So we have talked about hazard, types of hazard, and the disaster management and disaster management cycle. Now we'll look into a multi-hazard concept. So this is to describe the independent analysis of multiple different hazards like occurring of landslide, earthquake, volcanic eruption, flooding, everything relevant to a given area. So this graph and map actually shows the distribution of disasters by times. Like in the same place, what are the multiple hazards which has happened, like drought, epidemic, flood, storm, extreme temperature events, earthquake, tsunamis, etc. So this is a global disaster scenario. It is the distribution of natural disaster over the globe, and area-wise events are also differentiated with the different colors. And this is the distribution of people affected. So in the previous case, we have seen the distribution of different disasters. Here, the distribution of people who are affected will be has been mapped here. And this is the map of India showing the multi-hazard zones like earthquake zone, flood zone, drought zone, etc. And some of the India's deadliest disasters are listed here, like earthquake, cyclone, flood, tsunami. So mostly floods, cyclones, earthquakes are occurring. So earthquake, when we see the disaster earthquake, nearly 12% is prone to very severe earthquake, 18% to severe earthquake, and 25% to damageable earthquake. So the major earthquake was occurred in Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Arunachal and the Northeast. Himalayan regions are particularly prone to earthquakes. So many small-scale quakes occurred in other parts of India also. And this map shows the earthquake zones, indicating 60 cities with population exceeding 500,000. So very high zone, risk zone, high risk zone, low risk zone, moderate zone are being depicted in the map. Second is a flood. Uh, about 30 million people are affected annually. So flood in the Indo-Gangetic Plain are the annual features of flood. So nearly 75% of the total rainfall occurs over a short monsoon season. 40 million hectares or 12% of India's land is considered prone to. So this is a flood hazard map of India. And drought, of course, 50 million people are affected annually by drought. And 40 million hectares are prone to scanty or no rain. Rainfall is poor in 9 meteorological subdivisions out of 35 subdivisions. This is a drought prone areas in India, like severe, moderate, mild, and no drought. Next is the cyclone. Nearly 8% of land is vulnerable to cyclone, mostly the coastal areas. The cyclone activities on the east coast are more severe than on the western coast. So the Indian continent is considered to be the worst cyclone affected part of the world as a result of low depth ocean probability and coastal configuration. So this is the cyclone hazard map, wind and cyclone hazard map of India. Landslides majorly occur in the hilly regions like Himalayas, Northeast India, Nilgiris, Eastern and Western Ghats. So this landslide are another recurrent phenomenon. Landslide prone areas are largely correspondent to the earthquake prone areas. This is a map showing landslide affected states, highly affected, moderately affected, and marginally affected. And the last one is the Disaster Management Act. So this act was formulated in the year 2005 by the government of India. So this act provides for the effective management of disaster, and it also provides the institutional mechanism for drawing up and monitoring the implementation of disaster management. So this act also ensures the measures by various wings of the government for prevention and mitigation of the disaster and prompt response to any disaster situation. This is the legal institutional framework for the disaster management. The central government is ahead. So under the central government, we have state government, and the state government have the district administration. And under the district administration, we have the panchayat and the municipalities. The central government is formulated National Disaster Management Authority, and the state government is formulated the State Disaster Management Authority, and the district administration, District Disaster Management Authority. So the main aim of providing an institutional framework is to address the issues of early warning system, forecasting and monitoring setup for any weather-related hazard. A multi-stakeholder, high-powered group was set up by involving representatives from different ministries and departments for the institutional framework. And the national policy on the disaster management was framed by the Government of India in the year 2017. And this policy covers the aspects of disaster management, including the institutional and legal arrangement, financial arrangement, responsibilities, and rehabilitation, reconstruction, recovery, capacity building, etc. So this focuses on the areas where action is needed, institutional mechanism through which such actions are channelized. And the national plan contains national response plan, national mitigation plan, and national capacity building plan. So these are several guidelines by the National Disaster Management Authority, like management of landslide and snow avalanche, management of cyclone, earthquake, floods, chemical disasters, preparation of state disaster management plan, medical preparedness, incident response system, management of tsunami, urban flooding, etc. The National Action Plan on Climate Change contains the National Solar Mission, Mission on Sustainable Habitat, Mission for Enhancing Energy Efficiency, Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem, National Water Mission, Mission for Green India, Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, etc. And there are 6 national level institutions like NDMA, NEC, NPDM, NDRF, NCDC, NFSC, 2 state level institutions, SDMA, SEC, and 1 district level institution, DDMA. So the National Disaster Management Authority will be laying down policies on disaster management, approving the national plan, and the approved plans are prepared by the ministries or department of the Government of India in accordance with the national plan. So they coordinate the enforcement and implementation of the policy and plan for the disaster management. They also recommend the provisions of fund for purpose of mitigation, and they lay down broad policies and guidelines for the National Institute of Disaster Management. So this is the structure of National Disaster Management. This is headed by Ministry of Home Affairs, where the chairperson is a Prime Minister along with the 9 members as an advisory committee. So the National Executive Committee will be framing the policies and other frameworks, and they have National Institute of Disaster Management and National Disaster Response Groups. So this advisory committee will be in direct contact with the State Disaster Management Authority, and that will be headed by the Chief Minister with the 9 members as a State Executive Committee and the Advisory Committee. So these people will be in direct contact with the District Disaster Management Authority. So there will be 7 members who is chaired by District Magistrate, and there will be local authorities and advisory committees under them. So the National Executive Committee was constituted under Section 8 of Disaster Management Act 2005 to assist the national authority in the performance of its function. So NEC may, as and when it considers necessary, constitute one or more subcommittees for the effective discharge of its function. So the governing body of NADM is in here, the vice chairperson. Then NDMA will be there. Union Home Secretary will be the vice chairperson, and the secretary will be the member. Ministry of Finance and secretary will be the member. Additional secretary also will be the member. So as such, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, Kolkata will be the members in the National Institute of Disaster Management. So what is the role of National Disaster Response Force? So they were being constituted under Section 44 of the Disaster Management Act, and they'll be helpful for immediate response during a disaster. And there is a National Civil Defense College. So the first disaster management training institution was founded in the year 1957 at Nagpur as the Central Emergency Relief Training Institute to support the emergency relief organization of the Government of India. So this institute organized advanced and specialized training for revenue officials responsible for disaster relief operation against any natural or man-made disaster. And there is National Fire Service College, which was established in 1956 as a subordinate establishment of Ministry of Home Affairs with the aim of providing training to the fire officers of the country for firefighting and rescue, creating uniformity in the fire service organization, etc. And there are some national projects like National Earthquake Risk Mitigation Project, National Building Code, National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, Coastal Zone Management, Flood Risk Management, Landslide Risk Management, Drought Mitigation Measures, Road Safety Measures, Early Warning Response, and other things. So next comes the role of different government, like state government, central government, NGOs. The state government is having relief commissioners under the Department of Disaster Management who are in charge of relief measures in the wake of natural disaster. State level, state relief commissioner supervises and controls the relief operation through collectors or deputy commissioners. And the district government is subdivided into tahsils or taluks. So the head of the subdivision is called subdivisional officer. Head of the tahsil is called tahsildar. So the contact with the individual village is through the village officer or authority. And the national government will be national government will be functioning 24/7 to monitor the disaster under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So during the calamity of severe nature, special situation reports are also prepared and issued to the concerned. It also developed a branch called National Disaster Response Force. So the role of NGO is to mainly respond or to provide material relief and rescue operation during the time of disaster. So they help for a longer period also, like reconstruction activities like physical infrastructure of roads, houses, community buildings, drinking water facilities, etc. And this small and localized NGO initial response will be in the form of rescue and material. So most of larger India agencies stay back in disaster-prone areas for disaster mitigation long-term development of the people of the area, especially for disaster preparedness before the next disaster strikes. So, thank you.